Hey guys, so I hope you enjoy this video. My voice does not sound the greatest because I've been really sick, unfortunately, and the story is nowhere near as long as the original story I wanted to tell because I'm afraid my voice might give out. But here it goes. I met a really sweet dude through a mutual friend, but other than his name, I didn't know anything about him. We met for drinks and talked about ourselves. He asked about my family, and I told him a funny anecdote about my dad. At the end of the story, he just said, "Wow, that's nice. I wish I had a dad." I laughed, mistaking his increasingly deep cry for help as some weird, dark humor. Turns out, his dad walked out on his mom and other siblings when he was really young. It was a pretty touchy subject, and I laughed in his face about it. After he didn't laugh with me, it got really awkward. I feel like the biggest asshole, and I wish I knew why I just did that. We had one more date, but it was pretty clear we weren't going to work out. We're casual friends and laugh about it now. So a huge thank you and shout out to my friends who joined me on this video. As you can see, my voice is already starting to give out. Sorry about that again. Please check out their channels. I have linked them below, and have a very happy Valentine's Day.
We wanted to have a good time together, my girlfriend and I. You see, she's a nurse and has to work the night shift. The hospital she works at requires about 5 years of experience before you can even think about working on the day shift. This wouldn't be such a problem, but I work as a marketer. I have a typical 9 to 5 in an office, and it's really tough finding time for each other. Our sleep schedules are chaotic, to say the least. So, when Valentine's Day rolled around on a day and night that we were both working, we got really frustrated. It's really hard to explain how you feel like you're being cheated at a time. Like, there isn't going to be a moment you can sit down and truly enjoy your relationship for what it is. But we decided that we weren't going to let our lame schedules get the best of us. We decided that we'd visit a city for a weekend, away. Valentine's Day fell on a Thursday, but we figured having a little trip that weekend would be the next best thing, maybe even better. She's been really adamant about visiting Oak Ridge in Tennessee. Her grandfather worked there back in the day, and it's always been an interest of her. She's always telling me these facts about how creepy it is and how she just has to go one day. It's roughly an 8-hour drive from where we live, so we made a deal about driving. I was going to drive the entire way there, and she was going to drive while we were actually in the city. She totally got a good deal of the bargain, but that's just what you do when you care for your girlfriend. But something strange happened, something that has tainted my memory ever since then. When I think back and remember that weekend away, I'm not thinking about us cuddling up on the couch or any of the fun places we got to visit there either. We got there Friday night. She mostly slept in the car, but still felt really tired. She told me she'd be able to sleep at night once we got there, and be awake and be normal for the next day. So that's just what we did, and it was a really good day. We got to visit a museum and learn all about the Manhattan Project. Even got to visit a plant where her grandfather used to work. At least, we're pretty sure it's the one he worked at. He's deceased now, so no real way of telling. But the tour guide said this was where the majority of them worked, when the bombs were done. And well, I guess he worked on the bombs. Anyway, the day was great, but it didn't last very long. By the time it was dark, we were out of ideas for things to do and quite frankly out of energy. We decided to visit our favorite fast food joint, Wendy's. Don't judge us, and she was driving as we made our way there. It was only 10 or 15 minutes away from where we were. She had her music on and I was just kind of looking out the window. At one point, a blue Mustang was beside our car. We were stopped at a red light, and I looked out the window and peered into theirs. I saw a very old man. He looked unhappy, miserable even. His skin looked unnaturally pale, but I'm not sure when he started, but he was staring at me. It wasn't until I looked into the car that I noticed it either. Not gonna lie, kinda freaked me out. We made eye contact for about 5 seconds, and then for the briefest of moments, he smiled. But it was so fast. It must have been a split second that his mouth went into a smile and then back into a frown. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. I looked over at my girlfriend, and she hadn't noticed at all. She was jamming out to Bohemian Rhapsody. The light turned green and we were in motion again. I didn't take my eyes off that car for the rest of the ride, at least until they turned. That's not the craziest part. You see, it gets even weirder. We were planning on leaving Monday morning, and on Sunday night, we went out to eat, but this time to an actual restaurant. We weren't feeling fast food again. We looked on Google and found a local restaurant that had pretty decent reviews. I had my favorite food, deep fried chicken, so off we went. I had completely forgotten about that strange man I saw in that car, but about halfway through my meal, I noticed him again. This time, though, he was in the restaurant. He was staring at me. I know he was. And when I noticed, he did the same exact facial movement. Just the way I remembered. He went from a miserable frown to a split-second smile. And then he was back to frowning in just an instant. I'm not entirely sure my reaction was warranted. He hadn't actually done anything wrong to me, and I was enjoying a nice meal with my girlfriend. This is why it was so strange for my fight or flight instinct to kick in. I went up and confronted him. He was sitting at a booth alone. I asked him why he was looking at me. To my absolute surprise, he never said a word. Just sat there and frowned at me. I asked him what his problem was before my girlfriend told me it was time, and we headed home. She knows I can get a little worked up and wanted to avoid some sort of confrontation. It's not illegal to look at people, she said. Still though, it was something about that man that made me feel so strange, so watched. Well, Monday morning came. We were about an hour into the car ride, and she was asleep again. And you guessed it, you totally guessed it, I saw this freaky old man again. But this time it was way worse. For starters, he was driving a totally different car. I don't know what this guy's life is like, but I can just imagine what you have to do to be able to afford a Mustang and still have enough money to have a second car. And to make matters even worse, he had been in the left lane as he was going to pass me, but he didn't. He just placed me for about a mile. I noticed that there was a car next to me. It wasn't until I looked over to flip the bird that I recognized him. It was a creepy old man, but he wasn't frowning anymore. That smile that he'd been able to muster for a split second was now permanently stained on his aged face. It was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. Suddenly he turns his head forward and aggressively veers his car in my direction. Reflexively, I slam the brakes and swerve off to the side of the road. My girlfriend is shaken awake and all we can see is a vehicle speeding off in the distance through a cloud of dirt. My heart was racing like crazy, and by the time I could process my girlfriend screaming, asking what's going on, I started to feel myself choke up. We discussed whether or not we should waste our time calling the police, but I was so scared. The best possible course of action seemed to be just to get the hell out of that godforsaken town as fast as possible. The rest of the ride home happened without incident, and I haven't seen him since. Needless to say, that was the least romantic and most insane Valentine's Day I have ever had.
I've posted about this before. I met somebody through Plenty of Fish and went out with her for coffee. Once we sat down, the first thing she asked me was how much money I made. I didn't discuss figures, but I said that I was doing all right. She then regaled me with stories about her overdue bills and how she just didn't pay them because she didn't have the money, and how her last credit card only had a $5,000 limit and how quickly that gets used up. She didn't seem to have a grasp on how money, interest, and credit ratings work, and by her own admission, she had debts of tens of thousands of dollars. She made it quite clear that she wanted somebody who would take care of her financially, and if things worked out, co-signing on a credit card for her might be in the future. The whole date felt like a sales pitch and made me feel like a wallet on legs. I declined going back to her place afterwards, and instead went home and had a shower to wash the stench of loser off of me. And that was the last date I had before the one where I met the woman who became my wife.
So this happened around last May. I met this girl on Tinder. I really should have learned. She seemed cute enough and the conversation wasn't as stale as the other matches I had, so we decided to meet up for coffee. Cue the day of. I go to pick her up at her house. I knock on the door and she opens it. She was, to say the least, not at all like her pictures. She was much bigger and her face didn't even look the same. I'm already disappointed, but I'm already here and it would be rude to back out now. So she gets in my car and we start to drive to Starbucks. On the way there, we talked in the car for a bit and it becomes apparent to me that she is an XD rar, so random type girl. But again, I'm already here. We get to Starbucks and she gets me to order for her because I just can't handle that right now. Okay. We sit down and I'm already counting the minutes until it wouldn't be rude to call it a night. We started talking. Well, I start talking. The most I can get out of her is a yes, no, or a slight laugh if I tell a joke. From talking to her like this, I found out she's actually only 18. Her profile said 21, my age. Not a huge deal, but I wouldn't have gone out with her had I known that before. Eventually, I ask her what she does. Immediately, in one breath, she screams out, "I'm so glad you asked. I'm a professional clown. Want to hear my clown laugh? Honk." I am mortified. The entire coffee shop turns to look and she is oblivious to it. Suddenly, she is no longer this weird, shy girl. She starts telling me all these stories about her clown adventures. This goes on for probably 8 minutes. Everyone around is nickering and obviously listening in on it. Not that they had much of a choice. She then tells me loudly how her boss and one of her coworkers propositioned her for a 3-way. She goes on to say, "Yeah, I thought about it, but he's 40 and I was 17 at the time, so I decided not to. Plus, we were doing a child's birthday party at the time, so it might not have been appropriate." As soon as she says that, a girl in the corner of the coffee shop lets out a stifled laugh. My date notices and goes beet red. I suggest maybe we call it a night because I had an exam the next day. She saw through my lie but went with it. A few minutes later, I realized that tomorrow was Sunday. I drive her home. Awkward silence follows for the 15-minute drive. We arrive, I stay silent and don't get out of the car. She sits there for a bit, not saying anything. I go, "So..." What follows next is 100% true. She said this. I can't even forget it. She blurts out, "Want to come inside and have sex while my cats watch?" Yeah, she said that. I stay silent for about 10 seconds because I don't know what to say. I eventually say, I don't have any condoms, sorry." She gets the message and leaves. I hightail it out of there and never spoke to her again.
I took her out to Italian because she said she had never had Italian food. She was from Venezuela. She asked me to order for her. I order carbonara, she starts eating it, asks me if it has milk in it, and then runs to the bathroom because it turns out she's lactose intolerant. So I poisoned her. Then I take her home, and the minute she gets there, she finds out that her pet ferret isn't conscious anymore, and she decides she needs to go to the vet, and that I need to come with her. Okay, fine. We get on the subway with a semi-awake ferret, which it turns out is the one animal people universally hate. So strangers are telling us how vile ferrets are. She's crying. I'm just sitting there trying to figure out when this first date will end. We get to the vet, they take a quick look at the ferret, and take us into this room with soft lighting, nice furniture, art on the walls, and tissue boxes. We're in the bad news room. They say the ferret needs to die and it's going to cost $500. I think that's stupid, and I turn to her and say, we could do it for less. And then I say 2 words, Viking funeral. That was my actual reaction. I detail to her my plan to put her beloved ferret in a box, douse it in gasoline, and put it out on a river and light it on fire. She paid the $500.
We were having a nice dinner of salmon and roast potatoes at a dining hall. As he started talking about his day, I took a bite of salmon and felt a horrible pain slide down my throat and stop. Not knowing what the fuck that was, I tried drinking some water. Deep in my throat, I felt like I was being stabbed, and every gulp only made it worse. I realized this must be the stupid thing my mother had always warned me about when eating fish, that you have to be careful of fish bones or they will get stuck in your throat. Well, damn. I spotted some potatoes on the plate and started shoveling them in my mouth, to knock the bone out or push it down or whatever, as the guy starts telling me a joke. Well, the plan backfired, and once again, the pain became much, much worse. By now, it felt like someone had driven a screwdriver into my throat and was occasionally shoving it in deeper. So the guy finishes his joke and pauses as he looks at me, awaiting laughter. I burst into tears. He said, "That bad, huh?" "I'm sorry, I've got other jokes." And I managed to whisper, my voice not working so well, that I have a fishbone stuck in my throat. He blinks. "But it's boneless salmon." I didn't really know how to respond to this, so I just stared at him with tears running down my face. He goes, "So, do you want to leave? What do you want to do?" And I whisper that maybe if I just get more potatoes, it will go away, right? 3 plates of potatoes later, I have a fishbone still in my throat and am bloated and never want to see a potato again in my life. This guy just watched in confused silence while I ate potatoes and cried. When I looked up, he asked if it was still there. I nodded, and we decided to go back to my room. As we passed the salmon station in the dining hall, he points at the sign. "See? It's boneless." I didn't respond. When we get to my room, I called my mom, and she said I needed to go to the hospital to have it removed. Freaking out, I turned to go, and he insisted on coming with me to make sure I'd be okay. Sweet, right? Well, once there, he wouldn't leave. We waited 6 hours before any doctor or nurse would even see me in the ER, which I didn't mind. Some lady came into the bathroom while I was there, and suddenly blood was everywhere, on the floor, running into my stall. People definitely had bigger problems than my not being able to eat a fish properly. When a doctor came, it was some practicing med student who, without looking, said that most people think that the bone is still there when it's not. Salmon bones don't show up on x-rays, so he told me to go home. I refused, having just had the bone partially dislodged, then relodged, punching a second hole in my throat. He said, "Too bad," and went to get me my checkout forms. Well, the resident doc came in and reamed this student guy out, and I'm thinking, oh, thank God they're actually going to fix me now. Well, he told the student, "No, we won't release her until we're sure it's really gone. She could choke to death, or it could puncture her lungs." Okay, really scary, but okay. They're going to fix it. So the doctor takes me into this room, and the student comes trooping in after him. He brings this weird boxy thing with a long cord, as thick as your average electrical cord, with a slightly larger thing on one end. He tells me that, luckily for me, there's this new technology that can pick up salmon bones, and all they have to do is stick this cord through my nose and down my throat. I was not a fan of this idea. Worse, he said he didn't have time to do this, and it would be good practice for the med student to try it his first time. Worse still, all the med students and the nurses in this fucking ward come trooping in to see this new technology. And worse even more, the med kid is now nervous and his hands are shaking. So they spray some numbing stuff into my nose, most of it missed and just got on my nose. And then this kid with shaking hands tries to stick an electrical cord camera down my nose while 15 people watch. So I, who had managed to toughen up and stop crying hours ago, felt an electrical cord thing go into my nose and then came pain. Med student: there's resistance. Nurse: well, that shouldn't be. Just keep pushing. At this point, I have 2 holes in my throat and an electrical cord up my nose that's too big to fit, but the guy's jamming it in anyway. Yeah, I started crying again. Not sobbing or anything, just tears rolling down my cheeks out of sheer pain. This apparently freaked this kid out more, and the shaking got worse. I didn't need to see it. I could feel it in my nose. Oh yeah, and to get me into this side room, they kicked a tiny little old dying lady with nasal cannulas out, and she was shooting me death looks from the hall at intervals. So the camera cord finally goes in, and the kid looks through and can see the bone. Kid: uh-oh, it's right there in her vocal cords. That could mean serious damage. So he takes the cord out, and the docs arrange for an ear, nose, and throat doc to come the next morning to remove it. They say they cannot do it themselves because they may permanently damage my vocal cords. Awesome. Here's the best part. The 15 folks watching the camera cord procedure all wanted a turn. The resident doc came in and told me how important it is that people get experience, and if they don't get it, they could end up doing things slowly and poorly on people who could die at any second. So I felt bad and gave them permission, all 15 of them, to practice the camera cord thing on me. This was an hour-and-a-half ordeal of them sticking things in my nose and me crying and them pulling it out again and lecturing each other on technique and such. So this entire time, the poor guy I was on a date with is sitting in the waiting room. And it had been about 8 hours now. It's a school night, and it's 3 a.m. The nurse comes in and gives me a pill and says it will relax me before this operation and will numb my throat and stuff, and she says it may make me gassy. This is about when the nurses realize I have someone waiting for me in the waiting room, and told him he could come back and visit me. Yeah, while I was numbed up and not aware of much, and gassy. Awesome. The next morning they put me under, got the bone out, and sent me on my way. At classes in the afternoon, I had a spontaneous nosebleed that was pretty bad. I tried to cover it up with tissues until the person next to me turned, saw a ton of bloody tissues, and their eyes got really wide. I left. The guy texted me several days later and kindly asked if I wanted to try redoing our first date. I told him I'd be happy to.
So a huge thank you and shout out to my friends who joined me on this video. As you can see, my voice is already starting to give out. Sorry about that again. Please check out their channels. I have linked them below, and have a very happy Valentine's Day.